I have often referred to the stock market as a war. What does that mean and who is winning the war? We'll discuss that this week, as well as do my regular weekly market analysis, try to figure out if the market is more likely to go higher or lower in the near term, and I'll look at the day trade of the week on YTRA. So what does it mean when I say the stock market is a war? Well, keep in mind that every time you make a trade in the market, you're either the buyer or the seller. The buyer thinks that the stock deserves to go higher. That's why we buy. And the seller sells because they think the stock is overvalued and deserves to go lower. And for every trade, one of those people are wrong. The question is, who's winning over time? Well, you can tell that in the market when you look at the chart of a stock or the market overall. If there are rising bottoms on the chart, that means the buyers are winning, and I'll show you why in just a moment. If the sellers are winning, then you have falling tops on the chart, and again, I'll show that in just a moment. Now, the reason I bring this up right now is the market's at a really critical place because we're coming to a junction where the short-term buyers have been winning, but the long-term sellers are still winning the bigger war. And it's a critical point because one of those sides is going to lose control in the next week or two. Is it going to be the buyers? Is the buyers going to take over the long-term control? Or are the sellers going to hold the long-term control and break down the buyers in the short term as well? So let's take a look at a chart. And first of all, let's discuss why we say the buyers are winning when there's rising bottoms, or why are the sellers winning when there's falling tops? Well, anytime price moves up, the buyers are winning. So here the buyers are winning, and then sellers are winning when price moves down. Buyers are winning, sellers are winning. Buyers are winning, sellers are winning, and so on. So if you have falling tops, that means the sellers are in control. Because every time the buyers try to push the market up, they are unable to push it as high as they had the previous time. And so then when you have the bottoms rising over time, like we had this past summer, that means the buyers are winning the war. And you can see this on multiple time frames. Within this little phase here, the buyers were winning. And over the last 6 weeks, the buyers were winning. However, over the last many months, the sellers have been winning because the tops have been falling. Now here's where we're at this critical point, because you can see if I draw a line across these tops, we are getting close to the place where if we break through, we will break the cycle of falling tops for the sellers in favor of the shorter term rising bottoms for the buyers. But if instead we hit this and move down and break this little upward trend line, that means the sellers stay in control and the buyers lose the battle. And so it's an important point because it's really going to determine where the market goes in the weeks ahead. Now we've seen some relief to higher interest rates. I'll show you that in a moment. We're seeing the US dollar come down a little bit. We'll see that in a moment. All of those things are positive for the stock market, but will they be enough to break the long-term control that the sellers have had all year through 2022? All right, let's take a look at the markets that we look at every week, and we'll start off with a jump to the Stockscores website, and there we have the daily chart of the S&P, but let's take a shorter term view. How about the 1 month chart? Who's winning the war? Well, the bottoms are rising, so the buyers are in control, and therefore in the short term, it's a bullish market. But again, if we go to the 3-year chart, which is now a weekly time frame, you can see that the sellers are in control, and that's why we say we're coming to this critical point. Are the buyers going to have enough power to break through that downward trend line? Or are we going to see what happened this past summer when we had the summer rally, July into August, and then it rolled over and moved lower into the fall? It's an interesting thing to think about. Now, one other aspect of this chart that's important is that the bottoms are not falling as quickly as the tops are. And that's a sign that the sellers are actually losing their power. Because the last time they pushed the market lower, which was this past fall, They did so with less intensity than they did in the spring. So in the spring, we really saw the markets move down sharply. Then we had that summer rally, and then the fall pushed lower, didn't have the same intensity as it had in the spring. And again, that's a sign that the sellers are maybe losing some of their enthusiasm. All right, let's take a look at the Canadian market now. Symbol there is T.XIU. And we'll look at the 1 month chart. Who's in control? Buyers. So in the short term, you want to be on the buy side. But that's only in the short term, because in the long term, we're still struggling. Now, we do have a better chart here than on the S&P, because this chart has actually broken the downward trend line. We just haven't started to form rising bottoms yet. On the weekly chart, we still have falling bottoms. We would need to make a little pullback and then build a rising bottom, and perhaps then break through this, what we call a neckline in a head and shoulders pattern. And if that happens, if we can get a pullback and a break up from a rising bottom, then we should go back toward those all-time highs. All right, how about the commodity markets? Let's take a look at gold, because it has had a little bit of strength in the last couple of weeks. And you can see in the daily time frame, it's broken the cycle of falling tops. We haven't really built rising bottoms yet. We just have one low here. So if we were to go down and then move to new highs, we'd have a rising bottom. So it's a chart that's improving, but it's not quite there yet. But what you can see from this analysis is it's very easy to know who's winning the war, who's got the falling tops or rising bottoms. On the gold chart on the weekly time frame, falling tops was broken 2 weeks ago. Now we need to start to build rising bottoms to really say that the buyers are in control. All right, how about oil? USO is the symbol I'd like to use for oil. Let's take a look at the 1 month chart. In the last few weeks, the sellers have been winning. In the last month, it's more or less sideways, and we're sort of at some support here. But I would say the sellers are winning in the short term on oil. But what about in the long term on the 3-year weekly chart? Here is your long-term upward trend line. And notice we're right at it. And what's important is that this past week we broke down from a falling top. And so if we break this upward trend line from a falling top, we're going to have a pretty negative signal for the oil market. It's still in a long-term upward trend, but that short-term weakness is taking it towards a turning point for the oil market, which if broken could lead to a more substantial pullback in oil prices. All right, how about the US dollar? Take a look at UUP. Now you can see that the US dollar has been falling over the last month. The cycle of rising bottoms has been broken, giving way to falling tops. Now that's the daily chart. How does the weekly chart look? If you want the long-term picture, jump to the 3-year weekly. There's your long-term upward trend line. We went parabolic, running away from it, and now it looks like we're likely pulling back to it. Question is, will we bounce off of that, or when we get to it, are we going to ultimately break down? Really, the US dollar got overextended to the upside, and it's just giving back some of those gains. And that's very similar to the interest rate chart. I like to use TBT as a proxy for interest rates. And again, let's make this a 3-year chart. Here you can see the long-term control is among the buyers, which means interest rates have been rising. We got overextended, too emotional, and now we're making our way back to the upward trend line. What about the short-term chart? 1 month. You can see the sellers are in control of interest rates in the short term. Interest rates have been falling. Now the final chart will look like is a real case of the sellers being in control. This is the chart of Bitcoin, and you can see that there have not been rising bottoms on this chart for a very long time. And so if you just use this simple rule, it's a great way to stay out of problem investments, whether it's something like Bitcoin or many of the stock sectors over 2022 have been in a cycle of falling tops. Are we going to give way to rising bottoms? Well, it's starting to happen, but we still got to give it a little more time to see if the buyers can take control of the overall stock market. So US stocks neutral on the long term, bullish short term. Same for Canadian. Gold, same there, neutral long term, bullish short term. Oil, neutral on both time frames. US dollar, neutral long term, but bearish short term. Bitcoin, bearish on both time frames. And then interest rates, neutral short term, neutral long term, and bearish short term. All right, now let's do the day trade of the week. And it was a pretty sleepy week for traders as the market's really at this fighting at that long-term downward trend line. The buyers don't have the enthusiasm. The sellers aren't really sure either. So you get stocks that maybe gap up on the open because they have some good news, and then they kind of go sideways or drift. And there's not a lot of big intraday moves to give day traders that profit potential. Here's one that came up on Friday. And the key thing for stocks that I day trade is they always have to have abnormal volume. So we've got that. And then we had a action candle pullback break there. Let me draw that in yellow. There we go. There's one there. There was another one here and another one here. And they all worked, but not extraordinarily so. Small profits. And really that's the kind of day that it was on Friday. Now we go into next week with a holiday shortened week. Markets close Thursday and then a shortened trading session on Friday. So it could be a little quiet. And then as we come out of the Thanksgiving long weekend, we often get that Santa Claus rally. Will it be the thing, the catalyst that can break the control of the market from the sellers, or are the buyers going to give way to the long-term selling pressure? That's what's interesting, and we'll keep an eye on that. I'll be back again next week, of course, to answer some of those questions. Hope that you've liked this week's video. If so, click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and most importantly, trade well.